Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California, I'm Krista, and we are the Sixth Sense Society. Welcome to our first episode in 2019. We're very excited to come back and offer you a lot of great shows this year. Kristen, unfortunately, had to go to a very important event at the last minute, so we'll miss you, Kristen, and hope you have a great event, and she'll be back at our next show, which, by the way, won't be until the 20th, which we'll talk about when Michael talks about the upcoming shows. So tonight, however, our show is going to be on a little bit on New Year's, some traditions, and also some other New Year's dates for different cultures. And we are going to bring you our predictions for 2019. Michael especially will be doing predictions for the United States in different categories. And I myself am going to do my first deep dive into the United States astrological chart because there's some really cool things happening. So, but let's start off tonight, as usual, with a little bit of the cosmic weather. Tonight, the moon is waxing crescent right now in Capricorn. It's going to go void of course at 10:20 p.m. and then move into the sign of Aquarius at 10:46 p.m. So that'll take a break from Capricorn energy. There's actually plenty of that still going on. And then Tuesday on the 7th, we have Venus going into Sagittarius, and that's going to be at 4 a.m., as well as Aries is going to go direct, and that's in late degrees of Aries right now, but it'll soon be in Taurus. So as you know, Venus was in Scorpio and retrograde and all that. So now it's really going through into Sagittarius and has some different themes, which we'll talk about later in the year, or actually probably the next show, I would say. And then finally, on Sunday, the 13th, we have our first quarter moon at 23 degrees of Aries, 48 minutes at 10:45 p.m. Pacific time. So there's not a lot going on, except, of course, some of you know there are eclipses this year that we just went through our first eclipse. And I am going to bring that up for part of the program tonight later. And we're going to have another one later, and we'll talk about that as the year progresses. So the first thing I'd like to talk about a little bit, before I get going, actually, Michael, did you want to update us on some of the upcoming shows?
Yeah, we're going to have some really great shows coming up over the next little while. And first of all, I hope everybody had a great holiday and a really great new year. And I've got high hopes for this one. I think it's going to be a really good year when it's all said and done. I'm sure we're going to have some challenges too. That seems to go with everything. But I really do think that this could be a very good year as a whole. We have some great shows coming up over the next little while. As Kristen mentioned, will not be airing next week. Sunset Lodge, which is one of our sponsors and patrons and an organization we truly love, is having their installation of officers. So we're going to go support them in that, and that'll be on next Sunday, so we will not be having a show. We are back the following Sunday on the 20th, and we will have Troy Griffin, who is a intuitive that works with police cold cases. So, and I think that that's going to be fascinating. I'm looking forward to that, and I think we'll find out a little bit more insight about what's real and what's television when it comes to cold cases, and I'm sure that there's a difference. And then following that, we are back again with Adela Levine on the following Sunday, and she's going to talk about Rudolf Steiner and his work, and she actually attended one of the Steiner schools, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And he's just a fascinating character, and I think that that'll be a very interesting show. In February, we have some really great stuff coming up. We have a show on the tarot to begin with us, and we'll let you guys know some of our thoughts, and we've been doing it for many, many years, and some of our insights, and maybe how we see things a little differently than a lot of people. We're going to have who else is coming up? We have Brad Cronin, our astrologer, coming in. We're going to do a show on relationships just before Valentine's Day. And, of course, we get lots of questions about that as readers. So everything is career and relationships when you're a reader. So we've had 23 years of talking to people about their relationships. So we're going to try and give you guys some practical advice that we've gained over the years and gleaned in terms of what makes for a good relationship and how to find one and how to keep one. It's probably just as important. And then Jim McGrath will be be back with us, and he's going to do the history and symbolism of the Holy Trinity, which he says he really is excited about, and he's just a great guest. So we're excited to have him back and learn a little bit more about the Trinity, which is cool because that's something, the Trinity and the number 3 in particular is such an important number in so many religions and so many spiritual paths and cultures. So it's going to be very interesting to dig into that with Jim and find out what that's all about. And then we should be ending February with Krista's dad, with George Schwimmer, who is a expert on Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. And so we're going to have a good look at Edgar Cayce's life and work. And he'll be our, hopefully, if the technology works right, our first phone interview, since he now lives in New Mexico. So we're going to be excited to have him too. So that's kind of what we have coming up. And if you guys have any questions or you want to find out when certain shows are on, just go to our website, Sixth Sense Society. .com and another big announcement, by the way, is we are now a podcast, not just a video cast.
Yes.
So you can actually search for Sixth Sense Society on iTunes or Spotify or Google Play, and there we are. So you can listen to the audio if you're out hiking or at the gym or in the car, and you want to tune into our show. By all means, it's going to be there, and this show will be up probably later tonight or tomorrow. And so I'll try to get them on within 24 hours on the podcast after we tape. So there you have it. And tonight's show, we are going out live again. So we will hopefully, if everything works right, be doing live broadcasts from now on. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Krista, and I'll be chipping in. And tonight we're going to give a talk not just about some of the traditions and customs of New Year's around the globe, but more importantly, later in the show, we're going to make some of our predictions. So Krista has been studiously looking at the astrology chart for the United States, and I'm using tarot, so we're using 2 different methods. And even though we're husband and wife, I promise I've not told her what my predictions are, and she's not shared hers with me. So, because part of the fun is seeing if we have anything in common or if we see things differently. So this is not fixed or not rigged in any way, I promise. We're going to do this legit. And we'll see where it goes from there. So with that, I will turn it back over to Krista.
Thanks for all that, Michael. And one more thing I wanted to add is I wanted to thank all of the new subscribers. I'm really excited to have you, and I hope you like our programming. And thank you so much for subscribing. We really appreciate your support. So I'm going to do first just a little bit about some New Year's traditions. Some of them you're going to recognize, and some of them you may not. So one is, and this seems to be more connected to the January 1st New Year's, and so the Gregorian calendar. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different calendars too, and why we have different New Year's in different cultures. So one is kissing at midnight. So you better like who you're kissing at midnight, because that's supposed to be sort of a prelude to you being intimate with that person. So if you're drunk and you kiss someone and you really don't like them, you may be in trouble. So kissing at midnight is supposed to help to sort of, establish the relationship, at least for the year. The other thing, which some of these make kind of sense to you if you think about the time of year, at least for Northern cultures, like to fill up your cupboards, to put money into your wallets deliberately so that you have, of course, prosperity in the year. And, people are pretty superstitious. I bet every one of you out there has something superstitious you do, whether you do it because you made it up or your family, or it's a cultural superstition. This one I'd never heard of before. It's called first footing or lucky bird. So basically, the first person to cross into the house at the stroke of midnight is supposed to be important, and it influences the entire year ahead. Now, I don't know why or how this came to be decided that really the only good person to cross over the threshold is a tall, dark, handsome man, and not even a blonde-haired man or a red-haired man. That's not good luck, and all women supposedly are bad luck, which sounds very sexist to me. And then the person is supposed to be carrying a small gift like a coin, a lump of coal, which I would think that would not be such a good thing, but I guess it's to heat the house maybe. A lump of coal, what else did I find out? Coin, a sprig of evergreen, and some salt. Of course, if you've watched some of our previous shows, salt is purification and protection, so that kind of makes sense to me. And they're not supposed, this is kind of strange too, they're not supposed to be flat-footed or have a unibrow like Frida Kahlo. And though she seemed to have a pretty good life in some sense with her paintings. And then they're not supposed to be cross-eyed. So these are all superstitions. So Also, when they enter, even if they live in the house, they're not supposed to just open. They're supposed to knock and not just use a key. And then when they leave, the person's supposed to go out by another door. And again, this is supposed to bring good luck to the home and to be setting the tone for the new year. So the other thing I wish I had known is nothing goes out on New Year's, not even the garbage. So you can definitely, don't even worry about it. Everything stays in. It's the idea that I guess you're trying to not get rid of things or letting things go sort of symbolically. And personally, I think it was somebody that was lazy that made up that superstition and just thought, oh, that sounds good, A lot of us know about lucky foods, like in the South, it's black-eyed peas. Meat you're supposed to eat is pig because of the way they root forward, and that's supposed to be good for prosperity. And this year, by the way, it's going to be the Chinese New Year is the earth pig. And then a lot of this people know too, to make as much noise as possible at the stroke of midnight to scare away the spirits. So those are some common superstitions or traditions for people in sort of the Gregorian calendar and the New Year's that we all celebrate here in the West. Now, there are other New Year's, as many of you know, particularly if you live in a big city. Most people in big cities know at least about the Chinese New Year. There's also the Jewish New Year. So I'm not going to go over all of them. I just kind of picked a few because I have a partial, I guess, like for them or interest in them because I participated in them at some point. So what's interesting, though, is that most cultural New Year's really congregate around the springtime. And in fact, ours did too until Pope Gregory the 13th. So he was the one that moved it, and we will talk briefly about why that happened. So it makes a little more sense because you have springtime, you have the equinoxes. So, basically March and April is, except maybe the Chinese New Year, but even that's based more on a lunar calendar. So that's one of the most interesting things is that we have these cultures that practice both the solar and lunar calendars. So you'll have a civil calendar, but then you have the religious festivals following the lunar calendars. So some of the examples, so they're called lunar solar calendars if they do both. And then there's some that still only follow a lunar calendar. So some that have both the lunar and the solar calendar are, I believe, some of the Chinese, some of the Indian, and so on. So I'm going to mostly talk later on about some of the Buddhist holidays coming up. But before I do, I did come across a kind of interesting short little article by a fellow named Brad Plummer at Vox.com it was written a couple years ago about the Gregorian calendar and when it changed and why it changed. So it was in 1582 that Pope Gregory the 13th, he simply took away 10 days. He's like, we're going to take away these 10 days. But before he did it, there was a commission of two people. I think they spent maybe 5 years coming up with what would work, because what was happening because of it takes the Earth a little bit more than 365 days to complete the journey around the sun. In fact, it takes 365.24219 days. What was happening is the seasons were not going to be coordinated. So you're not going to have spring and springtime. So that was the reason. And so I thought, well, that's actually not a bad reason. So we don't want to lose the seasons. So that was so they did that. After 5 years, they came up with this system. They took away 10 days. And then they also tweaked the leap year system, which now it's still complicated. It's every 4 years, there's a leap year on centennial years that are not divisible by 400. So what's interesting about the calendars, the more you look at them and you look at time, you can see how it's all very arbitrary on some level. Even though we're trying to connect to nature, we're sort of breaking and making up our own rules all along. So it's kind of an illusion that we have this structure of time, even with the calendar systems. There are also, some people know, there are leap seconds, because even that isn't perfect. So they have to add a couple seconds every few years or so to the clock to keep it, again, in harmony. So again, as I said earlier, Pope Gregory the 13th, he was the one, I don't know exactly why he decided to move the New Year. It was originally at March 25th, and it was the Feast of the Annunciation, and he moved it to January 1st at that time. So at one point, we were also celebrating with all the other cultures, and the spring period. And now we don't. And so at least there's some logic, though, as to why they changed it. I thought it was just, the solar god against the lunar gods. So it wasn't quite like that. So anyway, I was talking earlier about the fact that some calendars are lunar solar. And the other examples I wanted to give were the Japanese have one, the Egyptians have it, and the Tibetans have a lunar solar calendar. The solar year also, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but this is just how layered it all is you can either define it by a tropical year or a sidereal year, which many people in astrology know the difference. So basically, the tropical year goes from equinox to equinox. And then the other one is really based more on a relationship to fixed stars. And so they're slightly different in time as well. And again, that's just another complexity to the calendar system. So as I said earlier, my interest, because I practiced Tibetan Buddhism for many years in my 20s, and I did attend Losar up at KTD Woodstock where I would go. I'm particularly interested in some of the different Buddhist calendars and celebrations. And also here in Los Angeles, there's a really great big Chinese New Year. And if you ever want to go out there, it's so much fun. There's always things you can do, and there's the dragons, and people do Tai Chi sometimes. So it's really, really celebratory here in New York. So this year, before actually the Chinese New Year, there is called on the January 21st is the Mahayana New Year, which I'd never heard of before. And then this year, February 5th, Losar does not always fall on the same day as the Chinese New Year, but it does this year. And as I said, this is going to be the year of the Earth Pig. And we'll probably talk about that more in February, what that will look like for people. And because I'm a fan of Aleister Crowley, March 20th is the Thelemic New Year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how they celebrate it a little bit later on. And then this one's really fun. April 13th through 15th, Thailand has a water festival. And it's one of its biggest festivals, and it's very well known, and it sounds like a lot of fun. And again, I'm going to talk about it more in depth in a minute. And lastly, in April 19th, the last Buddhist New Year that I could find was Theravada New Year. So it shows, now there's also Indian New Year's, there's Persian. So basically, if you miss one New Year, you can find another one to celebrate. But it is fascinating that some are even in the fall. There are some practiced in the fall or celebrated in the fall. So it's a fascinating thing that different cultures really work in different times and almost like different worlds, but we all still kind of live and work together. So I was going to mention briefly some of Losar, which I have attended here in the United States. It is a huge Tibetan celebration, and usually it's the first day of the first month, the new moon. And it's 3 days, but then it's followed by, evidently, at least in this one page I was reading, I didn't know this, there was 15 more days after that as well, which, by the way, is very common with other cultures. They take a New Year's and they extend it for 1-2 weeks, and they have these long, festivals, and you get to celebrate and relax. And I sometimes wonder if that's the problem we have in the Western world, is we really don't have much time to celebrate. It's always like, move on, to the next thing really quickly. So in Losar, there's 3 days, and the first day it's called the Lama Losar, which sounds like what it is. You pay tribute to the gurus. Some of the custom is barley seeds and sampa are offered at the home altars for a good harvest. And then the Tibetan women get up early to make barley wine at their homes, and of course families go to the monasteries and things like that. Day 2 is called King's Losar, and this is more for the Dalai Lama to exchange greetings with other leaders, evidently, which I'm not really familiar with that part of it. And then day 3 is where you make offerings to various gods, and you do protections, and if you want to put up prayer flags, that seems to be the best day for it. So and when I've gone to most of the Tibetan festivities, what's nice about some of the other cultures is the way they mix religion and pleasure together, like the feasting and the religious part. It's all kind of one, and it feels really good too. So I really like that about at least my experience of going to Losar. So as I said earlier, I also wanted to mention the Thelemic New Year, which I actually didn't know they did until I was reading online about the different New Years. And so basically March 20th it starts. And it starts with the invocation to the Lord of the Aeon, Ra Horquit. And it's basically commemorating the beginning of what Crawley said was the new aeon in 1904, where he proclaimed the new aeon of Horus. So it ends on the day that Crowley completed the Book of the Law, which evidently there's a couple of different opinions about that exact day in April, but it's roughly a little less than a month. So it's definitely very religious and has a lot of ceremony to it. And I believe they also celebrate after that as well. So that was kind of interesting. I didn't even know they did that. So those are just some of the other cultural New Year's that you can look forward to seeing more about if you live. Actually, a lot of places now celebrate them even in minor ways. And if you get a chance to go to any of them, even if you don't really participate in meditation, or it's one of the best ways to get to know a culture. Most of the time people are really friendly at festivals, and you get a real sense of, because of the music and the dance, it's really food. It's a great way really to find out in a very non-threatening way about other people and how they live and celebrate. So I think in this day and age, it's just one of the things that will help us understand and not be afraid of other cultures. And plus, it's really a lot of fun. I mean, I've always had fun, even when I don't even know what the language is. And the other one I wanted to say was the water festival. I forgot, in Thailand. They evidently, now it's gotten to the point where people will throw water on each other and strangers, and they splash it. And even though I think it was initially about washing the Buddha and kind of a purification thing, so it does sound kind of fun, and it's supposed to be really big in Thailand.
That's the kind of thing that will always sound really fun until you get your butt kicked for throwing water on the wrong person. So I would suggest if you're in downtown LA and you want to participate in the water festival, that you pick very carefully who you throw the water on, or
that's true.
Or that may not turn out so well. And the other thing I was thinking about when we were talking about doing this show on New Year's, of course, we're pagans, so we tend to see our New Year's in the fall and Halloween, and we used to have a great celebration, and lately our celebration has been helping Dillinger scare the hell out of little kids in his alley here in Venice, so which is cathartic and celebratory in its own way. But we used to have people come over to our home and we would decorate. And we always had this very simple ritual. And sometimes I think the simple rituals are some of the best, because people don't need to be concentrating so much on the rituals, so that they can kind of just more get lost in the experience and not have to memorize their lines, or worry about if they're standing in the right place or not. Mm-hmm. But the ritual that we had, that Chris and I came up with, was so simple but so moving, and it was really great. So what we used to do is we'd take a cauldron with a candle, and we'd hand out small candles to everybody that form a circle around the cauldron. And the first person, usually me, would light the candle that I was holding from the one in the cauldron. And the first part of the ritual was to summarize our year and to sort of make our to remember, so to act as remembrance. So we would go around the circle, and each person I would express, my thoughts about my parents who'd passed over, or friends that had passed over, and people that I wanted to keep memory of. And part of it is to keep their memory alive. And it's interesting because the Egyptians felt you had two deaths, and one death was your physical death, and the other more significant spiritual death was when people forgot about you and stopped talking your name. So I think that there was something powerful about keeping people in your memory and keeping their memory alive by remembering them at least once a year. So that was very moving. And then as I would finish, then the next person would light their candle from mine, and we go all around the circle with people, remembering their loved ones that had passed, until we had all the candles that were lit. And then once it got all the way around the circle, then the next part was phase 2, which is to make the New Year's resolution, to set the intent for the new year. And that's one of those things that you have to be careful what you wish for. Because I remember Krista one year said, this year I'm going to learn to be more patient. Do you know how you learn patience? Everything was just an ordeal. Everything got delayed, because she was learning to be more patient. So I remember the next year, it's like she'd had enough of the patient thing. She didn't want to have to be patient anymore.
So true.
So like I said, always be careful what you wish for with any kind of intent. And then you'd make your intention, you'd blow out your candle, the next person would do the same until all the candles were extinguished. So it's a very simple ritual, but we had people that would call from Australia that wanted to be a part of it, that had been there 1 year. And
yeah, that was
people
cool.
just asked if we were doing it and came back. So that was our New Year's tradition. So I hope if you guys want to try that at some point in a gathering, it was a very powerful and very moving experience.
That's wonderful. Yes. And you definitely can make up your own traditions in the house. And I'm sure everybody has little family traditions they like to do. And there is something about that that's really beautiful and helps you to stay connected to the past. And I agree with you. A lot of times the simple things are really the best in terms of also even having time to do it in this day and age. So we'll go on to the next part of the program since we do have a fair amount to say about how we see 2019. And Michael is going to start off with his predictions that, as he said earlier, I have no idea what he is even going to. The topic, yes, but I don't know what he's going to predict. We decided just to do it, as we normally do, and we don't talk about it to see what he comes up with. And also, before we start, what I'd like to say is how we see predictions. So this is my view, is that for us, we get a kick out of doing predictions for several reasons. One is it's challenging and it's fun because you get to kind of analyze what we see as lines of probability. There are some people in both astrology and tarot that have this sort of snobbery around predictions, which I don't understand because we live in a world that is constantly predicting things. And we're okay with it. Doctors predict things, stock market, games, people like bet on things. I think as long as you see it as a prediction, I think if it becomes something that's set in stone, then of course, I don't know that anything is set in stone except, as they say, death and taxes. So to me, it's okay. We're looking at probabilities. And the more you actually do it, the more interesting it gets. And there is both a logic and an art to it. So, sometimes it takes a little while to get the hang of certain kinds of predictions. So with that being said, let's start off with Michael.
Alrighty. So as Krista had mentioned, now I did the tarot, and she is going to look at astrology. So we're coming from two different points of view. But the first thing I wanted to look at is the economy, because that affects just everybody. And so what is this going to be like, and what are my thoughts for the coming year? So based on my reading, I felt that the overall economy in 2019 is going to continue to be kind of a very challenging roller coaster. We're still going to see a lot of ups and downs, I think, somewhat like we experienced at the end of 2018. So I think there are going to be times when the market's going to, look like it's stabilizing and recovering and moving positively, and then somewhere it just drops again and wipes out some of the gains, if not all. And so it's going to be that up and down, I think, energy. So people will have to pay really, really close attention if you're investing and so forth, because there is going to be a volatile market, I think, through much of the year. I think the periods that are going to be the most challenging, I think, are at the very start of the year. Now, I did this prediction, a few days ago, so it was really just before the start of the year. And of course, right at the beginning of the year, we had the market drop 700 points and then bounce back 700 points the next day. So clearly, that's sort of started to play out so far. So I think that that'll be the case at the first part. And then I think early summer and mid-fall, it just seemed to me like those are periods, again, where there could be a lot of, significant volatility and so forth. So you guys want to keep a close eye out, as I said, start of the year and early summer and mid-fall. But then the good news, I think, that the markets, by the time we get to sort of the latter part of the year and the very end, I think are going to start to turn in a more positive direction. I think it'll become more of a bull market overall. We'll get rid of some of that volatility. So, and if that holds true, and I haven't looked quite that far ahead, but I think then that 2020 is likely to be a much healthier energy in terms of economics as a whole. So bottom line, lots of ups and downs again this year, and I think just, be smart and be careful. So that's my thoughts on it. So what was Krista's thoughts on things like that?
Well, I didn't really look at the economy in the way you did, but I will say something that's going to be important about the overall financial well-being of the United States. What I'm mainly going to talk about tonight is actually longer than a year period. I stumbled upon the fact that the United States is going to be going through its own Pluto return in 2022, which Pluto takes 246 years or so to go through all the zodiac signs. So we've never gone through a Pluto return. Pluto happens to be in the United States' second house, which includes, and I'm going to talk about both the deeper level of the second house and the superficial, which is money, resources, finances. Why it's one of the reasons why we also have been able to have vast resources, and I think we've lost in some ways, like because of Pluto in the second house. So that because there is activity going on, I didn't really look at it in terms of a time frame. I do think we're still going through the desperate need to make some serious changes financially, and also how we how we also take things from people. And we're going to talk about that later with the seventh house. But so that's going to be more than this year, though. So we haven't, in a way, I totally agree with Michael in that the volatility. I didn't look at the specific months. I just thought that, in fact, one of the things that just happened was the first solar eclipse basically is on the, it's still in the first house in the United States chart. And the solar eclipses are, sort of powerful new moons. So we have the eclipses that are kind of also close to the second house that can sort of highlight again the theme of needing to really look at the structure and the underpinning of finances and resources and money in the United States. So in that sense, I just think it's going to be a longer trend.
All right. So, with that in mind, then I wanted to move on to looking at politics, which is another thing that obviously is going to affect all of us. And we've, of course, just had a change in government. So the Congress now Democratic rather than Republican. And I think that's going to, again, produce some very interesting times politically. And I think what's going to happen, and I think we're seeing this already maybe starting a little bit, is it's going to give many people in this country, I mean, some people will be upset, obviously, but I think that many people in this country, I think, are going to see it as a renewed sense of faith. So I think that they're going to have more confidence, which I think is a good thing. I still think there's going to be some gridlock and there's going to be some power struggle. I don't think those things are going away, completely anytime soon. However, I also think there's a few dark times ahead politically, and again, particularly the early summer. And then the majority of the fall seems under like it's a more difficult energy as a whole. So maybe that's stuff to do with infighting and maybe something else crazy happens. But those are the times that I see as being a little more challenged for whatever reason. And I think, again, during those times, things like additional government shutdowns are going to be very possible. And I think both sides will dig in their heels for trench warfare. It's not going to be a lot of cooperation or reaching across the aisle. Not that there's been a lot of that anyway, but I think even more so. And so no real effort for bilateral cooperation or anything. I think that will all fall apart during those times. But then I think that as we move into the winter, I think, again, peace gets declared and peace ensues. And I think things will start working more or less normally, at least as far as normal can be concerned when it comes to Washington. I think we'll see things starting to get back on track. And again, so I think both economically and politically, I think that at the end of the year, it's almost like a return to common sense. And we're going to see things getting back to a more normal footing, I think, as we move into those energies. So that's my thought on where we're heading politically this year.
I don't really have anything for that.
All right. See, this is the benefit of not knowing at all what Krista was going to do, so we'll move on. So then I wanted to kind of just look at things overall, and I thought one of the themes this year overall is going to be cooperation and healing, especially, as I said, that this is where we're headed this year, I think. So I think we're going to see the kind of karmic energy, I think, where there can be more justice delivered at times. And that's really good if you're innocent. If you're up to no good, probably not so much. Because I think it is coming back to the point of some truth and some justice as we kind of work through the year. But I also think that's going to bring people together in many ways. And I think it's going to be one of those cases where the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So I think the people will come together to create a common good where they perceive that things need to happen that way. And so in many ways, I think this is going to be healing this year, and it's getting back to something that I guess we'll call normal after the last year or two. And that's where I think we're headed overall. All right, Krista, away to you.
Well, I was going to save this to the end, but I will say that one of the animal totems that I picked as an ally for the United States was the frog. And the frog is all about healing. It's about releasing, absorbing things. It's a great listener. To me, it's kind of more of a still energy, even though there'll be times to move forward, there's times to be still. So I was kind of struck by when you were saying you think it's like a year of healing. I totally agree. And in fact, I think people should take the time and to heal. I also will say about the frog, because of the whole, prince story, and he's really a prince caught in the frog body, that there may be some unlikely heroes to come out. People that, to me, you might overlook. And they're actually really very helpful or very charming, the real deal. So you could look at that personally, but as a country, I think that's what's going to happen. And I actually think it's going to be some men that may come out that you're not going to expect to see as really being kind of, like I said, they seem like you might not notice them or think they're really, royalty. So that might have to do with the candidacies. So maybe looking at some unlikely candidates might be important for this year for the country. And I think that could be not just the presidency, but some other offices as well. So what I wanted to talk about was a little different from prediction. And it's because it's the first time looking at the natal chart. One of the things that's important when you look at any natal chart is you want to get the lay of the land, and you want to look at the dynamics and the psychology and the depth and the symbolism of the chart. And one of my big reasons for talking about the chart in this way is that there's a lot of really misrepresented things out there about astrology. So for instance, these generalizations about all Aries and all Cancers, I think we are big enough now and know enough astrologically that you have to have some context for things. It's not going to be the same. The full moon in Cancer is not going to be the same for everybody. You want to see, if you want to use any of these great tools consciously, you really do have to dig in a little deeper. So my goal is to help inspire you to dig deeper into your chart. And for me, it was really fascinating to look at the United States chart. So first of all, there are different versions of the chart, and astrology is full of things that aren't perfect. So I decided to go with the one on astro.com because I really respect that site, and it has Sagittarius as the ascendant. So that's the one and also Dane Rudyard uses that, and I like him a lot. So there are some other charts, and I will probably take a look at them at some point to see why I like this one more. But I went with this idea of the one from astro.com. So as I said earlier, what I got fascinated with this concept of the Pluto return, since people don't go through this, but countries go through it. And as some of you know, Pluto is considered to be the god of the underworld, and the kind of astrology I follow people like Steve Forrest, who believes that's an evolutionary astrology, and Pluto is one of the places you look for evolutionary changes. So it's very profound that we're very close to our first Pluto return. So I did a little thought, and I sat with the chart and looked at what do I think about it. First of all, it's in the sign of Capricorn. There is going to be a conversation between Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn more at the beginning of next year. So because Saturn, as many of you know, is in Capricorn already. So I thought that was interesting. So Saturn is going to actually kind of hit Pluto before we get to the Pluto return. And conjunctions evidently can be very powerfully negative or positive. I guess it probably has to do with the combination or also how you handle conjunctions. But in my feeling, it was sort of like, okay, they're kind of getting together and having a conference. And Capricorn, there is a lot of Capricorn energy this year, and because of the eclipses. So 3 of the 5 eclipses are in Capricorn, which also means you want to look at the polarity of Cancer. So according to many astrologers, in eclipses, you want to look at both sides of things. Capricorn, my husband knows a lot about Capricorn, and I do too from living with him since he has 5 planets in Capricorn. Capricorn likes to get things done. It's an earthy sign, so it's definitely more action-oriented. It's cardinal. So in a lot of ways, to me, it's kind of a solution period, so that we either need to consciously really find solutions for some of the problems at the basic foundations of our country. So this is since the beginning of forming the United States. We now know some of the things that just are not working. So we can see that in government. We can see that in, the whole, the marriage situation, which I'll talk about too, because of the Cancer that we have in this chart. So, but we really have to take it seriously and not only talk about it, we need to start really taking action is how I feel about it. And I think if we were not to do that, it is possible we would have another kind of maybe wake-up call in 2022. So I do remember now, I probably will say one thing politically. I think whoever is going to be in office in 2022 it's very important. I don't think I think we all sense that because we don't want Donald Trump to continue. But looking at the chart, I can see why it's important. it can set a tone that has a deep vibration that goes further than the next 2 years. So we want the right tone. We want someone that is wanting to move the country in positive, constructive, good directions. So one of the reasons I also wanted to talk about the consciousness of the United States is when I was an activist and in Venice more, I spent time helping to defeat a development. I worked on the Free Venice beachhead, and I learned a lot about being involved in community politics and helping. But I got really burned out, and I also learned that a lot of the sides are stuck, and both liberal, progressive, and conservative, there's a lot of stuck energy because they've been doing it for so long. And I think all of that has to crack too, that we are in this world now. We have to find ways that are real constructive ways to get along with people we don't normally get along with. And I got a little discouraged because I was so, yay, liberal progressives. And then I found they had a lot of infighting. Even they would talk about it and how, if we're on the same side, how can we have all this infighting? So to me, that there has to be a shift that is on all sides and whatever that looks like, but it has to be something you can actually do, not just think about and talk about. So that was the first thing I noticed. With the Pluto and the Pluto return. And then I also noticed that we have, now I knew that, I was pretty sure, July 4th, Cancer. This is the sun sign for the United States is Cancer, which is my sun sign. But it also has Venus and Jupiter in Cancer, which I didn't know. And I believe Mercury. So that's a lot of Cancer. So what I thought about was, wow, that's that whole family values idea. It's all that Cancerian energy. And it's in the seventh house, though, which is really the house of other people. It's a house of relationships, partnerships, and open enemies. So one of the damages we're seeing right now with Donald Trump is with our allies. Now, I think because of having such kind of good luck in that area, I think it can be repaired. So I think that alliances with other countries is a normal and part of the progress of the United States. And of course, many of us know that. And that's why we're appalled by what's happening with this current president. But I was really, and then the idea of Jupiter and Cancer, I think, because Jupiter is, it's happy in the sign of Sagittarius. So it's one of those things. And Sagittarius is about freedom and philosophy. So to me, I can see that America could possibly be a country, if it wanted to be, where we embrace all people in marriage. Like we have that potential, and you can see that in certain states, that we want everyone just to be happy. We don't mind if you're gay or straight, and so that's something I think that's still there as, even a better possibility than what's going on right now. But I did want to go back to one thing with the second house and Pluto. I was really fascinated with Pluto, and I'm planning on maybe going through the chart more through the year and talking a little bit more about it, because it's really kind of fascinating to do it and to think about some of the themes that really, even if you couldn't predict an event, you can predict the energies that can happen. So oftentimes astrologers like to go back and learn through history, and I like that idea. But of course, in hindsight, you can go, oh, that fits perfectly. In a way, I say yes and no to that. But at the same time, I think you can look at examples of how an energy works. So for instance, with Pluto, we'll give this sort of stark example. 9/11, Pluto was actually smack on the United States ascendant in Sagittarius. And whenever a planet like Pluto hits an angle, there can be some huge event. And with Pluto being, the god of the underworld, and also the one that's going to tear things down if you're not getting it, you're going to have to go down into hell. So that really struck me. I said, wow, that's crazy, that happened. And I'm sure if I go back, I'm going to go backwards in time and look at, before the formation of the United States, what was going on in the Americas, and see what was happening. So that's one example of looking at sort of the symbolism, but I don't believe in scaring people. And one of the things about Pluto being in the second house, anything under the horizon, is really in some ways about the psychological process. it's probably even more so than, say, above the chart where things are starting to come out into the world. So that's why, in a lot of ways, even if we don't get it right by 2022, I think it's just a good marking point. We're not going to get it all right. Obviously, we have time to, go deeper and change things kind of inwardly. And I would like to encourage people as part of the healing process to take the time to work with your consciousness, no matter what you're doing, whether it's political or not, because it really does have an effect on things. I know it does for me. And when I towards the end of my time with working more, diligently with the community activism, I found myself, because I wasn't taking care of it, much more irritated and angry than I usually was. And so I know sometimes we have to be involved because there's something urgent, but one of the things is you can stop and take breaks because there are other soldiers out there. They'll appear. And it helps everyone if you take the time to take care of your inner world too, and not think you don't have time for that overall. But as I said earlier, the second house, besides being important for the finances and money and your values for the United States, I was reading something that was really brilliant in Dan Rudyard's book, The Astrological Houses. Now, he's a brilliant man, and this book, I believe, came out in the 70s. So he started talking about and using the word possessions. And I really loved so much what he wrote about it, because I feel it applies so much to how, as a consciousness, the United States works right now with ownership, that I wanted to read you a good part of it. And so it's from The Astrological Houses by Dane Rudyard. He says, patterns of possessiveness and demands for exclusive ownership are still basic in our society. It is mine, no one else can have it, is the great cry of our modern, individualistic, and capitalistic society. The great drive is the drive for profit and wealth, and for the more intangible possessions related to prestige, social influence, fame, and even love. Nearly everyone clings to some kind of privilege. The negative aspect of ownership. It is negating because it is based on the past and usually on insecurity, fear, and pride. The positive aspect of ownership, on the other hand, is the capacity to bring the energies of nature and the values of the past to a new level of efficacy and fruitfulness. Not in terms of special privileged individuals, groups, or social classes, but in terms of the whole of mankind. So it blew me away, because I've been thinking a lot about how one of our problems that are a big problem besides healthcare is ownership in land. And the United States, with Pluto in the second house, having this need to kind of possess, other countries and whatever it gains, and not doing it for the right reasons, always having like sort of an alternative, like I'm going to go fight that war because I gained these assets. And I thought that is the consciousness behind so many problems that we need to shift to realize, and also that we have these resources that have been gained over thousands of years. We didn't create them. And that concept of the past being a buildup of the past, I thought was really brilliant. And just thinking about even the word possessive, how really isn't the United States like that in some ways, so possessive. And we always have to leave some little military thing somewhere, even when it's not needed anymore. And we're always trying to get other assets. So, and we've stolen assets too on top of it all. So I thought that is one of the areas to meditate and contemplate on yourself. And I have thought about it a lot, even myself, like what would it mean to own land for me? And what is the concept of ownership? How could we do it so that we all could live, or at least more of us could live better lives, instead of a few owning, so much, and then no one owns anything else. And that is, of course, one of the huge problems in the United States. So that is one issue that can come, I think, again to a sort of climax, because in 2008, when we had the recession, Pluto first went into Capricorn. So I thought that was interesting. And it's going to stay into Capricorn into 2024. So the lessons of Capricorn are till that time as well. And of course, you integrate and take those lessons into the next stage of things overall. So that's my part about Pluto. I wanted to briefly talk about the seventh house, and I'm going to go into that more later with women and maybe also some the thoughts about the women's movement more in depth. I'm going to kind of briefly touch on that. But as I said, the seventh house is full of the Cancerian energy. And Cancer, of course, is opposite Capricorn. We have these eclipses too, by the way, that are hitting both the Capricorn and Cancer, except for the one on January 20th in Leo. So the themes of Capricorn, Cancer, even energetically, are kind of playing out a lot this year, particularly. So Cancer traditionally is associated with family, the home, with what else? Domestic things. Being a Cancerian, they say all Cancerians are very emotional. Well, it depends on what age you are as a Cancerian, and also some people don't know like they don't know with Capricorn that it's connected to humor. A lot of the sort of you can hide behind humor. So sometimes Cancer wears a mask, and the idea of wearing a mask is often connected to the sign of Cancer. So it's fascinating that we have these planets that are connected to the seventh house, which is partnership and other people and marriage. And so I feel that, as I said earlier, that it's very important that we keep our relationships healthy with other countries. We need them. And the other thing I noticed about the seventh house is that Juno is going to be moving all the way kind of through. When does that start? I had written it down. It moves pretty quickly. So it is one of those things that might really be very beneficial for women and the women's movement. I can't remember when it starts. I think it starts, let's see, where was it? I can't remember. It does start early on in the year. I have it somewhere. Well, we'll leave it. So anyway, Juno, it's going to go all the way through the seventh house and ends up and towards the end of the year in the 10th house, which is where their Saturn is. So it's kind of sweeping through 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. And I thought that could really help perpetuate issues connected to the women's movement and the Me Too movement this year. And there can be some gains. There's one point where I think it is conjunct Mars. So that would be kind of interesting. I'm sorry I can't find the dates for that, when that's going to happen. I'll look at it. It's a little bit later, so I'll look at it next time we're on air. But so that way I think there's some positive things for women. And of course, we just had all the women moving into the office for making and breaking history. So that could be connected to the Juno as well. So that's basically the gist of what I wanted to talk to you about the United States chart. There's definitely a lot more in the chart going on, but that was, when I look at a chart, I just see what catches my eye, and I try to sit with it and work with it and see how I feel about it. And I just felt it was really fascinating about the Pluto return. And did you have anything else you wanted to add, Michael?
Yeah, I'll give you just a couple of really quick ones. I wish I had good news about the environment, but I just don't see the country changing course. I think that we're a long ways off from sort of getting it together when it comes to that. Health. I think that for some reason, I feel like this year is a year where we're going to have a breakthrough, where one of the really big diseases where they've been working on for a long time, they actually find a cure. Not sure which one, I'm not a doctor, but it just seems like there's a huge breakthrough when it comes to health at some point during the year. And then I want to give just one overall, I call it off-the-wall prediction. I think that based on a lot of what I'm seeing and where things are going, I think we're seeing the beginning of a real third party in the U.S. And I wouldn't be surprised if moderates on the left and the right start to feel like they're just being disenfranchised. There's almost a civil war going on in both parties now. And I think the stage is finally set for a legitimate third party. And I think if that happens, that could actually be a very good thing. I think it could break some of the deadlock that the two parties have. I think it would be sort of center-right, sort of economically, and center-left socially. So it's going to be a little bit forgiving and tolerant when it comes to, gay issues and marriage equality and so forth, but a little bit, fiscal restraint and things of that nature also. And I think that they're going to be the moderates in both parties are going to realize that we have more in common than we do with the extremes in our own parties. And I think that actually, for the first time, really creates a legitimate possibility for a third party to rise this year. So those are a couple of my last little thoughts, and I will turn it back over to Krista to finish out the show. So I hope all of you have a really great 2019, and it will be what we make it, And so do your best and keep your head up or keep your head down, depending on how your year is going. And good luck to all of you.
I did find out the time when Juno is going to cross through the 7th house and touch Mars first. It's going to be early April that it does that. So I think the spring will be an interesting period for women and women's issues, and I feel good about it. I don't think we should get too confident, though. I think we have a long ways to go with some of these issues, and that might have to do with that Jupiter in Cancer. One of the shadow sides, I guess I've recently heard, is Jupiter doesn't want to look at the shadow side. So we don't want to look at some of the problems still and in those areas. The other thing I wanted to say was I also picked an animal card as an adversary. And this one was interesting, so I'm going to ask Michael's thoughts in a minute. So I picked the owl, and initially I picked it reversed. So normally I don't read the animal cards reversed. I just read the whole thing, the positive and negative. It did strike me because the reversed owl is one of the familiars that is used by dark magicians a lot. There are a few that it's not the owl's fault. Owls are great. So it's associated specifically with magic. It's about all kinds of magic, and it is associated more with that idea of like candles and spells and psychicism. And it's also associated with wisdom. So, of course, reversed owl could be related to, that a lack of wisdom. In other words, not being educated or informed is really important. But what I felt when I was looking at it, I felt that there is, like Russia doing more. I felt there was more under the radar that can come in if we're not careful. That because the owl is a silent hunter. So more of that, the way they manipulated the campaign, and that we cannot take that for granted. And I also got this strange hit, and I'm going to go with it because Al is connected to psychicism, something about drone strikes and the misuse of the drone strikes, but I didn't get who. That was my only thing. I was like, because I just kind of go with my feelings when I do get images. I don't try to force them. And so I really thought it was connected to more of election procedures and to military problems, something coming up. And we could be behind some of the wrong drone strikes, like hitting the wrong people. So it's funny though, because frog is the antidote this year. So I thought, well, still, we're supposed to still be kind of more, healing and working, listening more, because frog will be more of a listener. So I just thought that it was kind of an interesting totem to have as an adversary. What would you make of that, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, it works for me. I think that you're probably right about a lot of that. And I think that, again, there's so much covert things going on. I think owl makes a lot of sense. And, it's, you're the expert on the animal stuff, so I'm going to yield to your greater wisdom when it comes to most of this. But I can see where that would make a lot of sense. And I think we do have to be aware that things may not always be exactly what they look like on the surface, too. That there can be things going on in the dark and behind the scenes. And maybe when it comes right down to it, we're going to have to trust our gut a little bit when it comes to that and just pay close attention, like I said.
Well, I was reading recently in the New Yorker, and I can't remember the exact technology, is that technology has gotten to the point where they can fake videos so well that they're now thinking we cannot trust pictures and videos. So I think it's going to be really important on the internet and Instagram not to react to these images and to be like the frog and not just leap and respond and say, wait a minute, And then the other thing I thought is that I really sometimes feel there are magical wars or people, in this case, using psychic things negatively. So I do know the Russians, for instance, really take psychic stuff seriously. They do way more studies than we do. And so I kind of felt there could be a misuse of psychicism, like through remote viewing, and that it could actually work, like as far as it actually being legitimate. I've always felt there's more going on experimentally, So anyway, that is our show for tonight. We are so grateful to be back, and we really are so glad to have you back. Please subscribe if you haven't. Follow us on our podcast. Give us a thumbs up. We're looking forward to doing our shows, and we hope you have a great start of the new year. And take care.